With this alt out of the way, we'll need to stub in the basic commands under the ebextensions directory that help define the lifecycle of our Elasticbeanstalk application. In the interest of getting to our first testable source bundle, we'll start by stubbing in commands.config under ebextensions, so that later the configuration and lifecycle can be managed over in the Elasticbeanstalk console. This way we can manage all the ongoing tedium of environment rebuilds, new deployments, and updates of WordPress, as well as the underlying infrastructure, including OS updates and patches for ongoing security. So now that we've got the new commands.config established under the ebextensions directory, this will serve as a place to put our growing collection of features that can be easily accommodated as work progresses. To start, let's first define a new file to be created during the deployment of the Elasticbeanstalk source bundle. So we'll start out by defining the files, and we're going to establish this under the EC2 user home and make sure that it's writable, or I should say executable. And we're just going to set up the permissions as to the user and group, or owner and group of this, and put our shebang here using the newer format for we're referring to bash. And I make sure to fail the script immediately in this first line in the set, and then source in the environment variables from Elasticbeanstalk. So this way, if there's any sort of failure, it should fail the process, so that way the Elasticbeanstalk sees that there's a non-zero exit code and then gives us the error in the console and all the other API calls as expected. So it's very obvious when things are failing. And then we'll go ahead and source in all the environment variables from Elasticbeanstalk. And right now, like I said, we just have stubbed this in. So we're only supporting one basic feature at this time, which is to be able to manage the upload max file size PHP option through the console. And this set is basically just doing a global find and replace, right? So we're doing a search, and we're going to look for the upload max file size and match everything on that line. And then we're going to rewrite that line. We're just going to replace it with an upload max file size of whatever's defined in the Elasticbeanstalk environment var in vars that we just sourced in. And we're going to do that globally for this whole sed command here. So it's a search, basic find and replace, basically. And we're going to do that over in the php.ini file. Now that the functionality has been defined, it's ready to use during the initial deployment of the EC2 instance being managed by Elasticbeanstalk. So we're going to add the following snippet above the one just defined so that it appears right after files. And again, we're going to set the permissions. And again, we're going to fail on any non-zero exit codes. And as part of this initial deployment, you're going to go to the app directory, basically, as defined by Elasticbeanstalk. And we're just going to make sure that we can set the appropriate permissions as expected. And these are basically just shell commands that we're scripting out to be done at deployment time. And then we're going to call our reapply configuration script that we defined earlier. And then we're going to continue building this upwards from a foundational, which is looked at less often as we add features and maintain this as time goes on, but work our ways up to the higher level stuff that we care about from an application perspective, or in this case, WordPress, right? So we'll put the command above the files block that establishes the post directory that we are leveraging in Elasticbeanstalk to handle at the end of the deployment. And we just want to make sure that this directory actually does exist, as I don't believe the files, they'll create files for you, but they won't actually create any missing directory. So that's what we're doing here. And I'm just going to ignore the errors, because if it's already there, that's great. You know, we're kind of getting into platform stuff, and Elasticbeanstalk's always changing. The EC2 OMIs are always changing underneath it. So As long as it exists, I'm fine. That's probably likely reason why this would fail. And some of the other scripts would fail for different reasons anyway. So we would still have the error bubble up to the Elasticbeanstalk console, which is what I've been using to manage the site. And so I think a lot of that's going to be pretty much covered by the scripts that are using this. And then finally, above that block, let's enact each reconfig of the Elasticbeanstalk environment. And let's go ahead and define the content of this script for our PHP changes. And so it's going to have a shebang at the top. And we're going to execute this on every reconfig. And this is a little bit of a reminder in the comments as to how the platform is doing this. That way, as we manage this repo going forward, we can make quick changes very easily. And we want to fail. We want to set E to fail in the first non-zero exit code like we've been doing. But I also like to include this extra debug output. So that way, if something with the site is weird, I could just go right in there and see what's going on. And so now commands.config should end up something like where we have the commands at the top here, and which is more of a personal choice, which establishes some dependent directories. And then we've got our 00 PHP INI, we've got our 99 post shell script, and then we've got a reapply configuration shell script that we reuse at various hooks, basically, that Elasticbeanstalk exposes to us. One of those being enact, and one of those being post. In this case, basically a post deployment. We want to execute this shell script and reapply our configuration at post deployment. And then when we enact, or when configuration changes in the console, we'd also like to reapply the configuration, make sure it's still exactly as defined. All right, so back in build.py, now that commands.config has been established, let's go ahead and get those copied into the WordPress directory from which the source bundle zip will be built. And I always like to write myself, especially when we're just kind of working through a build script like this. I like to write comments to myself so that I just forgotten why I wrote this code the way I did. I had to remind myself, this comment is really helpful, that we're always going to recopy some of these files as we're rebuilding these packages. Since this build script is designed to be rerun as many times as we need to, whether we're doing updates or whether or not we're doing new versions of WordPress. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and copy from our ebextensions directory, basically our commands.config. This is like what we expect to be bundled. And we're kind of putting everything under this WordPress directory that will eventually be zipped up as part of our source bundle and will be uploaded to Elasticbeanstalk for deployment. And go ahead and import the shell util. And let's take a look here. And then we're going to have to make sure that the configuration is also copied into the WordPress directory, which is interesting because if you take a look at the WordPress directory here, you'll notice that we have a wp config sample.php, but we don't actually have a wconfig.php, which is one of the next steps. If you follow along in the WordPress codex, that's one of the things it has you do is establish a wp config. And of course, I just did what a lot of people do and just looked at the sample wp config and started making changes. So that's one of the things we're going to want to do now.